Today's date is February the 14th, 1996. Survivor's name is Oscar Schwarz, Oscar Sdhwarz. The interviewer is Vivian Duval Davies, Viviannedevahlddavis. We're in Sydney, Australia, and the language is English. Camera's rolling.
My name is Vivian Duval Davis, and today is the February the 14th, 1996. I'm interviewing Oscar Schwarz in Sydney, New South Wales, Australia.
Camera's rolling. And set.
Could you tell me your name, please?
Oscar Schwarz.
And how do you spell that?
My family name is Schwartz, Schwarz. It was changed during the war by some error when I was given a pass at the time. Originally it was CZ at the end when I was given that pass, and it was spelled with a Z only. I thought better leave it like that to save complication. My first name is Oscar. It's the Hungarian way of spelling Oszkar. I changed that as the English way, Oscar.
So could you now just spell your name as it is now, please?
Oscar Schwarz, Oscar Schwarz.
And spell it now as it used to be before it was anglicised.
Well, Oszkar Schwarz.
Thank you. Did you have any other names? Were you known by any other names? And any nicknames?
No.
And what was the date of your birth, please?
10th of September 1922.
And your age now?
My age is 73, coming to 74, please God.
What city were you born in?
Kaposvár.
Could you spell that, please?
Kaposvár.
And what country?
It's in Hungary.
Thank you. Could you tell us something about your early life?
My early life, at first it was rather sheltered, and my father was an accountant in a brewery, and we had our flat on top of the office building in the factory. Comfortable life, and my mother was a homemaker. I've had a sister 2 years elder, and it was a close-knit family, and in the small town Jewish community there was a Jewish primary which I attended, and rather happy memories until I would have been about 10 or 11, when in the early 30s, firstly due to depression and due to the pressure on the Jews in Hungary, my father has lost his job. He had to make up with something not quite as good. My mother had to take up another sort of work in a shop to help out. And I was still going to school. In the school, when it was in the high school, obviously you were making felt that you are Jewish. You, as I was earlier made to believe that I'm a Jewish Hungarian, then they drilled into me, you are a Jew and not Hungarian. Notwithstanding that my father served in the First World War, and so on and so on. It's the usual story. I finished the high school matriculation, And by that time, all the various laws regarding Jews were, of course, in force. The prospect for future was not very good.
Can we just go back a little bit now to, you said that there was a lot of pressure on Jews, and that was one of the reasons why your father lost his job. How did you feel that? Did you have non-Jewish friends, Jewish friends? Who did you mix with in those early days?
Mainly Jewish friends. Among non-Jewish friends, there was always a little bit of restraint or a little distance. I was fairly close to a few of my school friends, as in the class we shared interest or the ones we found comfortable to be with. But nevertheless, when it came to a point, there was always, you are Jewish, I'm not. And that was not very good. It took certainly a lot of enjoyment away from the younger years.
What kind of a Jewish life did your family lead?
At the beginning, our household was of kosher household. We were not shomer Shabbat, but tried to respect as much as possible. As student, there was 4 students in the shul service, which I attended. Later on, because of financial difficulties, our household could not keep up the kashrut any longer. For Yom Tovim, the whole family went, of course, to synagogue, and my memories are as a young child with my parents, uncle, grandparents going to shul, and it was always, as essentially a family affair, rather pleasant. Towards the end of 30s, my grandparents have moved away from Kaposvár, and by the time I have finished high school, I had to learn a trade. It was obvious by the law of the land that as a Jewish young man, I cannot have a white-collar work, and it was obviously necessary to learn something. And the choice of my parents was that I learned to be an auto electrician. My father had somebody who he knew and took me as an apprentice, which was only for a year's term, since considering the school and background for anybody who was matriculated did not need for a trade certificate any more than 1 year's study.
The person you were apprenticed to, was that a Jewish or a non-Jewish?
The person I was apprenticed to was not Jewish, but with a Jewish wife. And my father has done something, a favor in the earlier years, gave him a position in the factory, in the brewery, and he was sort of obliged. But beside that, it was not really unpleasant. I just had to face up to it, that this is what I have to do, and finished the year apprenticeship, have got my trade certificate, and then quickly moved up to Budapest.
Did you hear anything about what was happening to Jews in Germany? Did that?
Yes, obviously, what came through with the filter of the Nazi propaganda, we did not know the truth. We knew that the oppression is in Germany. We knew that on our own skin, that what happened in Hungary. But when we heard the bad news, what filtered through, what's happening in Poland and Czechoslovakia and so on, Jews were taken away to camp, we just firstly half believed. Secondly, our belief was it can't happen here. It was so much the Hungarian Jews, mainly, especially in the mainland where we lived, so much assimilated that we considered ourselves part of the Hungarian life, which it was until, of course, that era began. And we had just a false security that, yes, that happened in Poland, it will not happen here because it's Hungary.
And yet you said that there was, did you feel that you were made to feel different as a Jew in your young years? When you say you were Hungarian and people were assimilated, did you feel that you were an odd person out among the non-Jewish community?
In a certain way, yes. We did feel obviously shut out. There was what you call the numerus clausus and later numerus nullus, which implies that what part of the total admittance to university could be Jewish. First, the numerus clausus was a closed number, rather small, then numerus nullus, not of anybody of Jewish origin would be admitted. Of course, there was always a little door next to the gate was shut, but if somebody has turned pro-form, Christian, believing it or not, they might have had a chance on an exception, whatever. But generally, even though we were somewhat shut out from the mainstream of the Hungarian community, we did still feel that we belong there.
What about in school, in primary and in high school? Did you have any evidence of the anti-Semitism from teachers, or?
Yes.
In what way?
Well, primary, as I said, I went to the Jewish primary. There was obviously a different story there. But as soon as I went to high school, some of the teachers, not all, did make us feel one way or the other, trying to give some difficult assignments, trying to make us ridiculed in class, trying to perhaps focus on the fact that, yes, this is your thinking because you are Jewish, and so on. Remarks of those were not uncommon.
How did you react to this?
We could not be very outspoken. It was rather defensive. And you had to take it, you had to take more as time went on. Of the school friends, there were some of them friends, not all. Some of them provoked a fight, some of them went into fighting or bashing, but that was not dangerously high. And
did you experience any of this fighting or bashing?
Not so much physically. I could stand up for myself, and I was not provocative. I was not top of the class or anything like that, which would have perhaps created a little antagonism. And I don't think I was. Although going home from the school, there were certain streets which I avoided. It's not school friends, but I knew there were some not so friendly, I would call them young thugs, and I would have rather not faced up to that marching through that area. It has happened, slowly disintegrated all the conditions. And partly for that, perhaps, or partly that I wanted to see a little bit more of the world, as soon as I could, went up to Budapest, which at that time was just a big city for me, and then nothing much else in the world was in the possibilities.
What year was that?
It was in 41. I started working slowly, sharing a room with a friend of mine from Kaposvár also. And
who did you work for?
I worked for, firstly there was an electric motor repair maintenance firm, and the principal was Mr. Löwenstein, also a Jew. And I was there quite a reasonable time. He was rather kind to me. My work experience was not quite what would have been expected from anybody holding a work certificate, since my apprentice year and past and so on. And I learned a lot more there in the following year. Then I've changed, and I believe the next job was a Mr. Szabados. That's a Hungarian name. A small firm. Mr. Szabados himself was an engineer, electrical engineer, and only about 4 or 5 of us in the whole firm. And that's where I was until my call up to the, what you call, military service.
And Mr. Szabados, was he Jewish?
Yes, he was also Jewish. And he, again, was very good to me, because at the time I was about 19 or 20. His son was already in forced labor, somewhere taken out somewhere to Russia by that time. And he sort of took me as a substitute, perhaps. And nevertheless, I worked properly. And
can you remember what life was like in Budapest at the time, outside of your working? What was the atmosphere in Budapest?
Well, I had really very little contact with outside life. At the time, it was rather small world, my world at the time. I took an extra job as a maintenance fitter for a little garment manufacturers, mainly industrial sewing machines and so on, and wherever that was any problem, I just went every 2 or 3 weeks and kept the motors in order. Other than that, I had just a few friends, and between working this extra job, there was little else to do. Although I tried a little bit of different life, I've joined a literary circle at the time, mainly to listen to some of those who took time to educate us. The name was Kisfaludi. It's named after a Hungarian literally great Kisfaludi circle. And I think every second or third Sunday we could go there and to listen to some poets or debates. But in my circumstances, just making a little more than the minimum to my necessities, I had an aunt also in Budapest, part of in a suburb. Occasionally I went to visit, and just try to entertain myself, look at the architectures, look at the Buddha, the castle, the Fisherman's Bastion, and so on. It's quite a lot to go and see and walk around in Budapest, and you can. And of course, I just had some casual friendships with girls, nothing lasting. And so the time went on, and in the meantime, I was chosen to be one of the chauffeurs, drivers, for the Hungarian civil defense.
How did that come about?
That came about that the police who organized this defense has called up all the Jewish boys of my age, that is born in 22, who had a driver's license. And we were put through various more severe tests in town, and about a half a dozen of us were chosen to be in different districts. That was something which was rather enjoyable. Whenever I was on duty, my employers had to foot the bill if I was called in, and if I was rostered for duty on my normal working time, it didn't matter, or sometimes it was an evening or a night service where I had to be on duty. The cars were actually requested from various private owners, and I remember it was a very lovely Mercedes, which was, I think, the proprietor of the Aqua Works in Budapest. It was the car I was driving, with more often than not a young police officer going to supervise something, buildings or underground parts of which was then a regulation, of course, that the bomb-safe houses would have to provide, and so on. But more often than not, they had to go and visit their girlfriends, so I was given quite a lot of liberty to use the car. It was quite enjoyable. And what's more, it was at the time that those drivers with the civil defense will be exempt from the forced labor, which was actually what you call military service for Jews.
Excuse me, can I just ask you, you were actually working in your other job while you were doing this? This was more or less a part-time?
This was something I cannot remember exactly, but about 2 half days a week, as we were rostered, that I would have to go. It was in Kun Utca, that was a street, K-U-N, and there was a fire brigade's home where was this office, and there was the garage. That's where I had to appear whenever I was rostered. And that went on for quite a while, for about 6 months.
How did the people you were driving treat you?
I would say very reasonably. They treated me humanly, spoke to me as one-to-one, and of course the subject that I'm Jewish and they are police officers in Hungary, of course it was already given a status of where you stand and where I stand. But it was, considering the time, it was not unpleasant. So much so that when in 1943, the time came for or Yom Tovim for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, I was requested and given permission or leave to go and visit my parents and grandparents. So I went from Budapest early September, and all the others of my year were called up. We, the drivers for the civil defense, were not called up. So I went, visited my parents who lived then in Kaposvár. Then with my late father went to visit the grandparents who then moved to another little village called Mohács. It would be about, say, 70 kilometers away or something like that. We went and visited the grandparents and then went back to Kaposvár. There was a telegram waiting for me from my landlady in Budapest, advising me that the exemptions were withdrawn and we are to appear, being called up at whatever unit we've been allocated to. So all I had to do is say a quick goodbye to my parents, sisters, whoever in Kaposvár, and that was the last time I have seen them. Back to Budapest, where I just had to collect my backpack, and then beeline to a little village called Bereck, B-E-R-E-C-K. At that time it was in Hungary, and presently in Romania. That's the part in Transylvania which changed during the history, sometime belonging to Hungary, sometime to Romania. And there I had to appear. It was just a few days before the others were already there, just myself and perhaps one more who had some reason to delay. And that's when it started, the story of my forced labor.
So we'll break there.
Yes.
This is tape 2. Mr. Oscar Schwarz is being interviewed on the 14th of February 1996. So you've now been called up for labour. You've presented yourself in Bereck. What then?
Bereck, this is in the foot of Carpathian Mountains, and it's the easternmost point of what was the old Hungary, they called the Great Hungary. And we had nothing to do with the population there. It was just a camp out in the nowhere. A few concrete barracks, and every unit had its own sort of barrack to settle in. And
what were the barracks like? What were the living conditions like in them?
A big concrete building with absolutely nothing in it to help you much. We had some straw to make our bed. We had to have our own blanket. And generally speaking, everything, every equipment, whereas in the army there were, of course, equipment and uniforms, boots, everything issued. We had to provide our own. The unit was 13/4, that was known by numbers. And it was, I think, 4 sections of it. And the activities were to keep us working, to dig trenches just for experience, to cut off trees in the mountains, bring them down, of course, and generally what you would call work for backing up engineering part of the army. But at that stage, it was just quite simply to keep us occupied.
So what were the conditions of work like?
At the beginning, there was quite tolerable. Firstly, we had our strength. And young people of 20, 21, 23, and so on, they usually quite resilient. And the work was physically not very easy, rather demanding, but our conditions made it sort of tolerable. The soldiers who were, excuse me, who were given the task to watch over us and so on, called the frame. And anyone belonging to the frame had to be responsible sort of for any unit if we were sent up to the mountain to do some work or sent out to the road to do some work, whatever. Some of those soldiers were not bad, but the head of the whole unit was rather hard and harsh.
These are Hungarians?
Hungarians, yes. Facilities were not really what I would call 5-star. Toilet facilities were rather insufficient. And if you can imagine that, say, 150 boys will have to get up 5 o'clock in the morning, get washed, ready, and line up for inspection within a half an hour, and there was toilet enough for about 3 or 4, then it would have created some slight problems, among other things. And of course, anybody was found relieving themselves outside the toilet were punished constantly. And other sort of things similar to that were not made life very easy.
What was the food like? How did you eat?
The food at that stage was somewhat, I would say, to the conditions acceptable. It would have been sufficient. Nothing very spectacular, of course. You had your dish, which you had to guard, because if you didn't have a dish, you couldn't eat. You line up, and the cook would then dish out whatever it was, usually something similar to a goulash, and not that it would have been overdue amount of meat in it, but still it was enough to keep us going. After about a few months, and I cannot remember exactly the time, how long that was, they put us on the move. We were put in wagons and traveled up to north of Hungary, and then past the mountains, past the Carpathian Mountains, which was then presently Czechoslovakia, or the Czech Republic, then it was Poland. We were taken out to not to the front line, way behind, but there the real work started. At that time, I think the Hungarian and the German armies were ready to withdraw and had to build up their defenses accordingly. So we were given the job of building tank traps, the way it was called, and undermining roads, to drill holes on the roadside and put explosive in, to place it ready to be blown up if it's needed. The tank traps consisted of railway lines cut in certain lengths, put up in a triangle in river beds. So it was a shallow river where a tank could negotiate. That would have to be something to stop, as it would have been. I don't think it would have been much use, but nevertheless, on the technique, or perhaps the idea of how to build those, or how to stop the tank advancement. And also we were given one of the most difficult jobs, to get the trees cut in the mountain and bring it down, to build other auxiliary roads sometime, or to help and reinforce the tank traps. Those pine trees were fairly big and very long, and it didn't matter which end of it you were. Of course, on the thick end, we were put fairly close to each other. On the narrower, on the thinner end, of course, we were a bit more spaced apart. But try to negotiate a way down from the mountain. It's not a straight road. And sometimes you step into a little hollow, where all of a sudden you will find that the tree is above you. But if the other end of the tree stepped in the hollow, then you would find that whichever end you were, the whole thing is weighing on you with 3 times its real weight. It was a terrible, difficult job. But nevertheless, we had to do it. And then the worst part of it was that our lodgings were always something improvised. And the workplace was sometimes 10, 12, 15 kilometers away. The work had to be done. So that was one stage when wake-up call about 4 o'clock in the morning, a very quick, similar to coffee perhaps, was given, perhaps with some biscuit, ready in no time, and start marching. That was enough for quite a few. On arriving to where we had to work, there was not very much time allowed for rest, and then it was really the very hard times. And of course, finishing the work when the daylight finished, back again to our lodging. Sometimes too tired to even undress, just try to snatch a little bit of a sleep before the next morning's wake up. Given always one day a week when we could, or we're supposed to, tidy up our clothes, repair our whatever it is, if we still had a needle to sew, and generally to clean up, have a little rest. And so it went on, and in winter time it was rather difficult, very severe.
Well, but you supplied your own clothes still?
Yes.
Did you have the money to buy them? Or?
No. What we had, that's supposed to last. We tried to preserve everything as best we could. You see, on the time of my arriving to Beretsk, I had a rather heavy, big rucksack. spare pair of boots, which I was told that it would be handy, a very good blanket, whatever it is, sufficient underwear and so on. And the supply just started to thin out. After about a year, there was just barely anything I could wear, nothing much to change. And occasionally conditions were really rather severe. What you think of natural in your everyday necessity? Toilet paper. It can be very miserable life without it. And so on. You run out of shaving cream, you run out of sometimes soap. We've tried, everybody had a little bit of money on more or less, depend on who it was. And we could still buy occasionally near a village or where people came to our lodgings selling some of these necessities. And then, past the winter, springtime came in 44. That's where I had a letter from my mother. And in desperation, she wrote that my father was taken away. I didn't know the meaning of it then, only learned when I arrived back to Kaposvár afterwards what it was. He was taken away by the Hungarian gendarmerie, and from the place he was working, he did not belong to the ghetto of Kaposvár. He went to another ghetto where everybody was taken away, all the males, taken to a little village and shot. With that letter came a little parcel, a couple of shirts, whatever other thing what my mother could then, who was already in a ghetto in Kaposvár, which I didn't know about. And that was sadly the last letter which I had from them, from my mother and sister. Life went on from bad to worse as we went into 44.
What was the food like by now?
Thinning out. We practically, with perhaps very little exception, we all had gastrics. The food was inadequate, much the same all the time, and certainly not enough to keep you in condition to work, which we were to do all the time. So much so that if it was in between no job to do, our unit was taken to a certain part of a road, and to repair, to improve the road, there was some, perhaps, some stones or blue metal or something similar, which we had to put it on the road. We had shovels, pickaxe, and so on. Put it on the road very nicely. Then the rain came and there was a mud, and we had to shovel it off again, but just to do something. And while at a work of this caliber, I had a stroke of good luck. I have heard there was a unit of engineers in the same area, and I've heard one sergeant talking to another soldier with him, that they have a problem because both of their generators are not working, and they need a battery to be charged because the I don't know who was the officer, the head of that unit, expects to have that battery for his radio. So I took all my courage and went to that sergeant, and as it's done for a Jew, I presented myself and I told him that hearing their problem I perhaps be able to help. Looked at me, how? I told them that I'm an auto electrician, and if I have a look at the generator, it's possible that I can repair. Oh, that'll be good, all right, come along. I said, not so easy, you have to ask my sergeant, which they did. And I went along with them, and I found really a very simple problem, which technically was just a generator changed polarity. I could do it instantly, but of course I made a little longer story of it. So one of the generators was always in pieces, the other one was working, and that took me more than 2 weeks away from the hell. I was given good food, I was given a chance to heat up some water and to have a bath, and I had a near human life again. And in this time, part of our unit was, where I did belong, taken up to the top of the mountain because there was already the advancing Russian units coming, and they needed some extra work to dig trenches and whatever. From that unit, about a third of them did not come back. And it was a rather severe condition then. I escaped that. So after that, again,
you never went to it. You were working for the engineers.
While working in the engineer, I was exempt. I didn't have to go up with the others. And then we went on further. I cannot really recall very much, just a few of the little villages in Poland, like Svetoslav or Hrebenov. It was, I think, close to there is a little river of Stry. I don't know how, I think the Polish, S-T-R-Y, that's how they spell it, but I'm not quite sure of that.
And this is in Poland, you're taken out of...
That was in Poland.
Of Hungary into
yes,
Poland.
Yes. But after a while, that did not take long because of course, in 1944, the German and Allied armies were pushed back already. We could see quite a lot of soldiers marching back, injured, and some of them limping on crutches, and obviously part of a defeated army. We were always in the background doing some sort of work, and that took us to the autumn of 1944, when in Hungary the Arrow Cross took over. The Arrow Cross was the extreme right party, and they openly, not only anti-Semitic, but their party was the one who collected Jews anywhere and they shot them on sight. They were doing that in Budapest, which we learned afterwards. We were pushed back as a unit, still belonging to the Hungarian army, back through the Carpathian Mountain again, and this is where I would take it as about October 1944, the Russian army caught up with us. By then, conditions were sort of disorganized. Nearly every unit disintegrated. The the command positions were helpless, and we tried to escape. Once we just, with about, I think, 3 or 4 of my friends, we try, and in a little village, try to hide in a haystack. We were found, and we were told that, yes, military tribunal on the next occasion, back in line again. That took another couple of days, which was not very easy, but we could escape again. In a little place called Schwartz. It's presently in, I think it's either the Czechoslovakian or the Slovak Republic. It was the north of Hungary at the time where the Russians caught up. They came in like pincers, like a pair of pliers closing in, but not very fast. They came in from 2 different directions, trying to close in, but stopped to let people escape. They didn't want to collect a lot of sick and others. And that was the time when our command post wanted to take us out and into Germany, one of the concentration camps. But we managed to escape.
You first escaped, you escaped for the labour camp, right?
Yes.
And now the Russians...
Back to the labour camp again.
Yes.
And then when the Russians came,
yes,
we escaped again.
From the Russians?
From the Hungarians.
From the Hungarians.
Hungarians. Well, we didn't know what liberation means. Well, firstly there was nearly tragicomical, but a comical event. The way the Russian units came through that village, when all our framework, the soldiers were already disappeared, we were, so to speak, free, and the unit came in with horse-drawn carriages, and one of them, rather simple, Russian soldier stopped his carriage, indicated for us, about half a dozen of us, to line up, and he's got his gun ready. And he said something, but we didn't know what. But luckily, one of the boys, who was from Czechoslovakia, understood. And he told us that this soldier says that we still want to work for the Germans because we still had our spade and shovel and whatever we were given, but we had to stick to it because if we lost, we were punished. Once he told us what was that soldier's problem. You've never seen shovels and pickaxes flying away in such a big arc as it was. So then he was convinced that we're not going to work anymore for the Germans. He went on. And so it was. What then? I went into that little village, to a house of a peasant. I told him, look, this is the story. I can work for you if you let me, if you give me shelter and something to eat. Of course. Well, we had to work a little bit on his field. He had a little patch, and to pick potato, to dig up the potatoes, and to work generally for 2-3 days. In the meantime, the Russian main army went through, and we were sort of hoping now, all right, the way will be clear to try to go home. Everybody's mind was to go home and to see, to find what has happened. And that was the time when on the street somehow a few soldiers came and collected everybody who looked sort of in reasonable condition and told us, "Davai, malinko robot, come along for a little work." And we didn't know what that meant. Sometime a few weeks, sometime a few years, depends on your luck. We were assembled on a place and given various jobs to do. And it was my luck that they took me with a group to another little town, a little bigger than a village, Berehovo. At the time it was Bereksas in Hungarian name, to work to the supply of the Russian army.
I think we'll break there.
Right.